we were always playing outside, and I had spent most of my time at the golf course. People would hit golf balls and I'd go pick them up. My claim to fame is I shot a 52 when I was 8, and it was featured in the Bismarck Tribune. I remember when I was young, the pediatricians used to make house calls. And I remember the pediatrician, and I can remember their names, Dr. Smink and Dr. Tudor. And they used to come and make house calls for my mom because she couldn't get all of us kids into the doctor at the same time. Fortunately, the doctors were so patient. And I remember as I grew up, my mom would say, "Freddie, you're going to be a pediatrician someday." After I finished college at the University of North Dakota, I spent a year trying to travel the country and get to know different parts because I had never been out of North Dakota much at all, if at all. And so I lived in Minneapolis, and then from there I moved to Denver. And in Denver, I became an orderly at a rehabilitation hospital. While I was at that hospital, I met a lot of individuals, young individuals, who suffered from accidents and they were either quadriplegic or paraplegic. And I became very close to many of them, but one family in particular from New Jersey, the father was about 35. He had dove into shallow water and hit his head underwater on a rock and didn't come up. They resuscitated him and he ended up at Craig Rehab in Denver. My friendship with him went very deep, and as a result of that, I was invited to live in New Jersey with his family so he could get readjusted to life. They also offered me a job to be his personal orderly while he was back at work, and so I spent 2 months in New Jersey touring New York, living with the family. And it was at that time that I developed diabetes. I started losing weight. I was urinating frequently, which you classically do with diabetes. And my grandfather was diabetic. My uncle was diabetic. In fact, he was the first person to be treated with insulin in North Dakota back in the 30s. The syringes were huge in comparison to what they are now. And they used the syringes over and over again, the needles. So every time he gave himself a shot with this syringe, this needle that was this long, he would unscrew it from the syringe and put it into some alcohol. And that's what he did twice a day. He gave himself shots. And then my aunt was diabetic, and they all had insulin-dependent diabetes, or what we call type 1 diabetes. Type 1 comes on very quickly. You lose your ability to create insulin. It's an autoimmune disease that attacks the beta cell portion of the pancreas, which creates insulin. So they have no insulin. Type 2 diabetes, as you get more obese, with type 2 diabetes, the obesity, the fat cells interfere with the function of insulin. So individuals with type 2 actually are producing more and more and more insulin. Eventually, they're going to exhaust their pancreas so that it can't produce insulin. So they will eventually become type 1 and type 2 unless they lose weight. Weight loss and diet control and exercise are so critical in both type 1 and type 2. But in type 1, we have to teach the children how to adjust their insulin when they're going to exercise. In type 2, we tell the children, we want you to exercise so you won't have to take insulin. When I went to medical school at the University of North Dakota, since I had diabetes, I was very interested in everything that had to do with diabetes. And when I was in pathology class, it seemed that every disease was caused by diabetes. Everything from kidney disease to heart disease to blindness And as a result of that, I became very interested in learning as much as I could about diabetes. I didn't know I was going to, at some point, be taking care of children with diabetes, but I did know that I wanted to learn as much as I could. When I finished medical school, there was very little technology with diabetes. It was urine testing. About my last year of medical school, they developed these devices that tested your blood. So you could poke your finger, and after 2 or 3 minutes, you could get a blood sugar check. And so that became the gold standard then for diabetes care. Shortly after I finished medical school, I started my pediatric training at Denver Children's Hospital. And during my pediatric training, since I was diabetic and I knew a lot about the disease, a lot of my fellow residents asked me questions about it whenever they had a patient with diabetes. And so I seemed to become aware of every child that was admitted to Children's almost that had diabetes. Once I came to Billings, my partners were so welcoming to me, and I joined the Billings Clinic, which has been a fabulous organization. Anything that I wanted to do with diabetes, especially pediatric diabetes, they were very supportive. And after about 3 to 5 years, I decided that we needed to develop a diabetes center of excellence for children of Montana, because there was no one in Montana, no one in Wyoming taking care of children with type 1 diabetes. And it's a very difficult disease to take care of because there are a lot of social problems. You have to deal with the families, you have to deal with the children, you have to deal with their growth, because as they grow, their insulin requirement changes constantly. And then all the new monitoring devices that were coming out, people were confused. What, should I order this? Should I get this? Well, not only should you get it, but you had to learn how to use it correctly. So we needed a center which involved a dietitian, a nurse, a diabetic nurse, a social worker, and a physician in order to take care of these children. So our visits were very long, usually an hour every time they came in. And as a result of that, you can't see very many children. And as you know, if you're going to have a diabetes center, you have to have philanthropy, you have to have an endowment, and you have to have ongoing fundraising activities. And so we did that. We started a golf tournament, which we still run every year at Yellowstone Country Club, in conjunction with the Ronald McDonald House and our Pediatric Diabetes Center. We also have a huge endowment fund through Jim Duncott and the foundation at the Billings Clinic. Jim has just been unbelievable. He has been so positive and so encouraging for everything that we've wanted to do. And so we have been very successful in building a diabetes center at Billings Clinic. And as a result of that, we have received patients from North Dakota, all across the state of Montana, northern Wyoming and central Wyoming, some from South Dakota, some from Minnesota, some from Alaska. And once we got enough patients from certain areas, we decided that instead of having all those patients drive in from Bozeman and far west, let's just open up a clinic in Bozeman, and one of us will have to drive instead of all those kids driving down and their families driving down. So we started a clinic in Bozeman, we started a clinic in Miles City, we started a clinic in Cody, Wyoming, and we started a clinic in Williston, Montana, because these were the areas that were central to all the patients that were coming in. And those clinics became very successful, and many of them were 2-day clinics, so we had to stay overnight with our team. And that, again, was very expensive for the Billings Clinic to support. When families first come in with diabetes, if they're a brand new child who has diabetes, of course, the parents are in shock. They usually bring the grandparents in as well. And I have to tell them, I say, you know, your child has diabetes. And once you have diabetes, it never goes away. But I said, I have diabetes. And I've had it for over 40 years. And all of a sudden, they're willing to listen. And we talk about the importance of taking good care of yourself and your child. A lot of times when the kids are first come in, they may be as young as 3 months old. They could be 6 months old. They could be a year old. And the parents have to do all the work. Parents basically have the diabetes. But at some point, usually about age 10, the children start to take more control of their diabetes. They're more willing to give their own injections or put in their insulin using a pump. They're more willing to check their own blood sugar and tell their mom what the number is on the meter or how high the blood sugar is. So we try to teach the parents that at certain levels as the child grows, they're going to be able to do these things, and we want them to be able to do more and more. When they get to be teenagers, of course, anybody with a chronic disease in the teenage years is going to suffer from depression. No one as a teenager wants to be different from anyone else, and it's very difficult going through the teenage years with type 1 diabetes or any chronic disease. And so I try to get the social worker involved in each one of those families at that point and try to have the social worker identify any issues that we need to deal with. We also have a lot of children with other comorbid diseases like attention deficit disorder, so the kids can't even remember to do the injections. And so there's all kinds of ways that our social worker, psychologists, nurse practitioners, diabetic educators, and dietitians have to teach them how to remember how to take care of themselves. I had great partners who were very excited to have me take care of their diabetics. So if there was a new diabetic that came in into our office, I had educated all the nurses in the office of the symptoms, signs and symptoms to watch for as far as potentially a child having diabetes. So they would always put that patient on my schedule, or if the doctor found out they had a high blood sugar, they'd send them over to my clinic. So not only was I seeing my own patients, but a lot of work-ins, new diabetics. But my diabetes team would help me see all those patients on a daily basis. I remember we had one young man who was playing basketball for Billings Senior, and he was on the JV team. And he came in with high blood sugar, and he had lost like 10 pounds and was somewhat sick. And he said, I have a basketball game tonight. Can I play? And this was the morning. So we hooked him up to IVs and gave him a lot of fluid and got his blood sugar under control and under normal conditions. And so we said, go play. So he went and played in his basketball game and then came back the next day, and we did all of our education with him. And we kept kids out of the hospital. And that was our goal, was to keep kids out of the hospital by educating the family, educating the children and young adults. There is a diabetes camp for children every summer. And back in the 90s, the camp was going to close up. They couldn't fund it because they didn't have a doctor, they didn't have a nurse, and so I became the doctor. Not only that, but I recruited my wife, my son, my brother, my sister. It was a family affair, and it was a friend affair. I had so many of my friends and so many of my coworkers. One of the most important things at camp is the fact that they get to meet other children with diabetes. Because when they go to school, they don't know of anybody else that has diabetes. They think they're the only one that has diabetes in the whole world. They get to watch each other give shots. We have kids that come to camp, they refuse to give shots. And their parents are afraid to have them go to camp because how are they going to get their shots? By the time they leave camp, they are excited to give shots because they see all the other campers doing it. They learn about insulin pumps. They learn about continuous monitoring devices. They see the other kids that have these devices, so they look at it and they see what they have to do, what they have to go through, and all of a sudden it's okay. When I was at camp, this had to be 10 years ago, I remember a young Native American, he was probably 25, 26 years old, and he came to camp to be one of the camp volunteers. And he said, "Dr. Gunville, do you remember me?" He said, "You saved my life." And I said, "I did?" He said, "I came to you, I'm from Browning, and I came to you with my mother, and you looked at me and looked at my numbers and had followed me over a couple of years, and at the end of the second year you told me, you said, you know, you're not going to live very much longer if you continue taking care of yourself this way." And he said, I went home and I thought about it and I decided that I'm going to change my life. And he started giving his shots and he started testing his blood sugars. And now he comes back to us at camp and wants to take care of children with diabetes. And not only that, he has 2 children. He's married and he's a volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club in Browning. So he was telling me all these good things and I thought, wow, kind of touches your heart sometimes when people give you these stories. Oh, I have to tell you about Colleen Wood. She's the physician that's now in charge of our Pediatric Diabetes Center. Colleen, when she was, I believe she was in college, so she called me and she said, I'm going to be going to medical school and I want to be a pediatric endocrinologist. And she said, you're the only one taking care of pediatric endocrinology patients. Would you let me work with you someday? And I said, sure. And I said, Colleen, come on with us to diabetes camp and help me out. So she said, oh, okay, that'll be fun. So she came up to diabetes camp and she fell in love with all those children with diabetes. And as a result of that, after she had practiced for a year or 2, she went back to Denver, did her pediatric endocrinology, and she's now a pediatric endocrinologist at the Billings Clinic Pediatric Department. So I am so fortunate. She is trained well beyond me. And so it's just fun to see somebody like that take over my position. Over the years, both my wife and I, when we're walking together, we will have patients come up and say, Dr. Gunville, do you remember me? And most of the time I do remember them, but sometimes I don't. And they'll say, I'm so-and-so. And they would always say, thank you so much for what you said or for what you did for me. And it is so heartwarming, you know, for the both of us to go through this together. Because as a physician, as you know, a lot of long hours took place. And outreach clinics were often done on my days off. So we were going places, putting in long hours, and you can't do those things without a very supportive wife and family. I mean, that means everything.